The Sharpe TV series gave us more than just heroic charges, bloody battles, and Richard Sharpe's glorious rise through the ranks. It also delivered a rogues gallery of scoundrels, tyrants, backstabbers, and outright monsters. In this video, I'll be using Tiermaker to grade from Legendary to D all of Sharpe's named villains from the show. Some are generally terrifying, some are deliciously loathsome, and some are barely even villains at all, to be honest. Before I start the list, I wanted to expand on a few criteria on the enemies chosen. The characters in this tier list are ones who only appear in the TV show. Anyone from the books that doesn't appear isn't included. I am also ranking them based on their TV portrayal. I won't be ranking if a character is more of a threat in the novels than the show. I'll be doing this in named alphabetical order, starting with our favourite moustache menace, Bartholomew Girtwood. Colonel Girtwood, played by Mark Lambert, is one of the most insidiously effective villains in Sharpe's regiment, not because he's violent or charismatic, but because he's the embodiment of systemic corruption wrapped in absurdity and cowardice. A pompous martinet with a taste for theatricality and self-aggrandizement, Girtwood commands the 2nd Battalion of the South Essex, on paper that is. In truth, the battalion is nothing more than a sham, a ghost regiment used by Lord Fenner to embezzle army funds, selling enlisted men into other regiments for profit while keeping up appearances. When Sharpe investigates the missing reinforcements supposedly promised to his South Essex regiment in Spain, he uncovers Girtwood's operation, and what he finds is both ridiculous and appalling. Girtwood surrounds himself with flattery and illusion, completely detached from the real horrors of war. His authority is a performance, bolstered by bureaucracy and fear, and yet the illusion is deadly. Behind the comic exterior lies a cruel system. Men lives being stolen, sold and discarded for money. Girtwood may not carry a musket or brandish a sabre, but his complicity in this human trafficking operation makes him deeply dangerous. For me, that is why Girtwood goes into the A-tier villain status, for being one of the most uniquely Sharpe-style antagonists. His villainy isn't in battlefield betrayal or frontline cruelty, but in bureaucratic indifference and cowardice. He represents the rot of the heart of the British military politics, men playing at war while others die for real. His downfall is satisfying, but his presence is a stark reminder of the injustice Sharpe fights against. Not just muskets and sabres, but the powerful men and officers who treat war like theatre and soldiers like property. Next we have not the newly gazetted Captain Gibbons as his uncle would like. Christian Gibbons, played by Neil Dudgeon, is the textbook example of a smug, entitled officer who earned his commission through privilege rather than merit. Gibbons oozes arrogance and condescension from the start. In the novels, he is described as the son of a saddler, but styled himself as a gentleman. He dreamed of being a cavalry officer, but was unable to afford the commission, so settled for lieutenancy in the Light Company of the South Essex, which had been formed by his uncle, Sir Henry Simmerson. His uncle by marriage, that is. Despite his repugnant personality, Gibbons is never particularly threatening. He's more of an annoyance than a nemesis, lacking any real strategic menace or combat prowess. In a way, you almost feel sorry for him, as he tries to court the Lady Josephina but gets rejected at every turn. Having said that, he was complicit in her beating and assault, which left her scarred and scared. But in essence, that was the brainchild of his friend Mr. Berry instead of him. Gibbons' biggest sin is being a spoiled, petty aristocrat who represents the rot in the British officer class that Sharpe battles against. He is memorable for being a snob, but not much more, and I think that's why, for me, he is a D-tier villain. He's not really a villain per se, just a petty boy, really. Now, moving on to Colonel Brand, who is played brilliantly by Mark Strong in Sharpe's mission. He stands out as one of the more insidious enemies Sharpe faces, not for his brutality or flamboyance, but for his quiet betrayal and the way he weaponizes loyalty and rank. A respected British officer with a seemingly spotless record, Brand's villainy lies in his double life, outwardly a trusted comrade, inwardly a traitor working with the French. He murdered Lieutenant Graham and staged it as a heroic rescue, earning promotion to colonel and forming his own unit, Brand's Boys. In 1813, they aided the French agent Colonel Cresson in a plot to capture intelligence officer Major General Ross. Brand proposed an attack on a French powder magazine, convincing British command to send Ross and Sharpe along. Along the way, Brand killed witnesses, massacred a gypsy camp, and ambushed deserters with faulty weapons to maintain his cover. Sharpe, though, uncovered the truth, as he normally does, arrested Brand, and convened a court-martial, where Brand was sentenced. Defiant to the end, Brand taunted Sharpe, who, let's just say, got a rather entertaining end by being pushed down a well. But luckily no one saw it. So I think for me, he goes into the B tier list of villains. Brand lacks the explosive menace of an A tier villain. He's more effective than any of the blowhard officers that Sharpe deals with. His portrayal is impactful and personal, and it's one of the few times Sharpe is nearly outplayed by someone inside his own army. However, his short screen time and lack of deeper development keep him from breaking into the higher tier. We now go to Colonel Cresson, who's played by Peter Le Campion, who was the French officer who, before 1810, recruited Colonel Brand, or Major Brand as he was then. Colonel Cresson is one of those antagonists who could have been a major thorn to Sharpe's side, but instead ends up more of a mild inconvenience than a proper threat. His few confrontations with Sharpe and the British forces are underwhelming, and he's quickly overshadowed by the real villain of the episode, Colonel Brand. There's no ideological conviction, no real backstory, and no defining moment that makes him memorable. He simply ticks the box of French officer who gets in the way. Having said that, he does get quite a fun death, from our favourite comedy duo, Calvé and Gaston. I think that's why he has to go into the D tier for me. He's not completely incompetent, but he's a stock character, a placeholder villain who exists mainly to give the plot something to move around. He's not especially evil, threatening, or clever, and once the episode ends, he's rarely thought of again. Next, we have Colonel de Leclerc, played by Malcolm Jameson, and is essentially seen as the main antagonist in Sharpe's Rifles. Sharpe's Rifles is more about Sharpe than any other antagonist, but in any show you still want to see a villain get their comeuppance. In the episode, de Leclerc and Thomas Vivar are pretty much joined at the hip in the show. However, whereas Vivar was more of an idealist, de Leclerc was more aggressive. He led the chase against Teresa and the other Spanish guerrillas, as well as an ambush on Major Dunnett's rifles. He's also seen keeping the Allies at bay, whilst Thomas Vivar attempts to take the chest from Harper. His best moment probably is in the end, when he and Sharpe duel. Sharpe looks to gain the upper hand, but de Leclerc shows his true colours by pulling a gun out on our hero Sharpe. However, he was stopped by Perkins. I think in this episode, he just serves as a device for Sharpe to show his bravery and skill, which is why, unfortunately, he will also go in the D tier list of villains. He's stylish but shallow, and not truly a memorable villain. Next, we've got the Comte de Marquer, played by Christian Brendel, a smooth-talking, duplicitous French aristocrat who plays a central role in Sharpe's siege. At first glance, he doesn't seem like much of a villain. He's refined, charming, well-dressed, and claims to be a royalist looking to raise a rebellion against Napoleon. He comes across as far more of a politician than a soldier, and that's part of what makes him dangerous. He hides malice behind his manners. The Marquer's real villainy lies in his deceit. He manipulates the British command, specifically Major General Ross and Colonel Banfield, in supporting what he claims is an uprising in Bordeaux. In reality, he's working as a double agent for Napoleon's forces, feeding the British misinformation and drawing them into a trap. Once the Comte's true allegiance is exposed, he loses his nerve, and is killed in the ensuing chaos. His death is swift and unceremonious, much like the end of his credibility. And he did have quite a good death, with the two riflemen having goes at killing him from afar. The Comte earns a B-tier ranking for me, not because of a physical threat, but because of the strategic threat he poses. His deception nearly costs the British an entire mission, and contributes directly to the near death of Sharpe's wife Jane, who is gravely ill with fever, while Sharpe is cut off from the army. He lacks the raw menace of A-tier villains, but his guile and duplicity make him a memorable and effective enemy. The Comte is a perfect example of how warfare in Sharpe isn't just fought with bayonets and rifles, but with lies, betrayal, and political ambition. Now on to the first female villain, Donna Juanita, who was played by Ciri Neal and was in Sharpe's battle. She is a fascinating and morally murky figure who straddles a line between spy, seductress, and saboteur. Juanita inserts herself into British affairs with charm, poise, and apparent patriotism, but it quickly becomes clear that she is playing a far more dangerous game. She, in truth, is a French agent working with Brigadier General Lou, whose main objective is to gather intelligence, manipulate British officers, and facilitate the sabotage of Wellington's campaign in Spain. She seduced Lord Kiley, provoking his wife Lucy. She spreads anti-British propaganda and false reports of French movements to aid Lou. When Lucy's pregnancy prompted Kiley to send her away, Juanita manipulated her escort into handing Lucy over to Lou. After being seen by Miranda conspiring with Lou, Juanita murdered the girl to protect her secret. She later warned Kiley that Lucy would be killed if he supported Sharpe's assault on Lou's fort, hoping his desertion would trigger wider Irish defection. During the battle, Sharpe escaped and confronted Kiley in a duel. When Sharpe won and prepared to kill him, Juanita shot Sharpe and urged Kiley to finish him off. Instead, Kiley killed Juanita, stabbing her with his sword, and no, probably not the way he did earlier. Donna Juanita for me is a C-tier villain, not because she lacks ambition or cunning. She has both in abundance. While her espionage causes complications with Sharpe and adds to the tension with the Irish company, for me she just doesn't leave a major body count, or significantly alter the strategic course of events. Her presence causes disruption, but not devastation. Although her killing Miranda was sad for Perkins especially. So next, well, I think the less said about this character the better. El Casco is the helmeted guerrilla leader from Sharpe's Gold, a figure swathed in mythic overtones and an unsettling presence in the Spanish countryside. The name, El Casco, literally means the helmet, referencing the ornate helmet he wears, obviously. A symbol of both his status and the performative cult-like authority he wields over his ragtag followers. He is played by Abel Fox, and is a completely new character made for the television adaptation. The novel featured an entirely different Spanish partisan, El Catolico, as its main antagonist. His key narrative function is to serve as the wild card, a third force apart from the British and the French, but in execution, he lacks any real depth or threat. He's more bizarre than terrifying. Ultimately, he is killed by Harper in some Aztec-style caves, and his death in slow motion is, well, something. Anyway, he goes into D tier for me, because while he is undeniably disturbing, his villainy is shallow and largely aesthetic. He has no ideological conviction, strategic power, or meaningful impact to the broader war. He just doesn't test Sharpe intellectually or emotionally. He's just another obstacle to overcome, albeit a very weird one. Next we have El Matarif, played by Matthew Skerfield, and is a sadistic and shadowy figure serving as an enforcer for the French-allied Spanish Inquisition in Sharpe's honour. Cloaked in black and exuding menace, El Matarif is less a traditional military opponent and more of a symbol of institutional cruelty and terror. He is not a commander or a strategist, but his brutality and mercilessness make him a palpable threat. His role is to intimidate, torture and kill, a task he performs with chilling relish. He operates under the orders of Father Hatcher, another Inquisition figure working with the French. El Matarif aided his brother Hatcher and Ducos in their plans to frame Sharpe for the murder of Le Marquis and take his fortune. His methods are cruel and efficient, and while not psychologically complex as other villains, his presence adds a layer of horror to the episode. I'm going to put El Matarif into the C list. While terrifying, he lacks depth and motivation beyond being a tool of others. He's effective as a short-term threat, but he doesn't leave a lasting mark on the broader story. He's a memorable face of fear, but just not really a master villain. And now we have Father Hatcher, played by Nicholas Grace, who also appears in Sharpe's honour, and is a chilling example of twisted piety and fanatical nationalism. He is a torturer and executioner who hides behind religious authority to justify his sadism. In the narrative, Hatcher collaborates with French intelligence officer Ducos and his own brother to destabilise the alliance between Britain and Spain. Their scheme involves framing Major Sharpe for the murder of La Marquise, thereby inciting political turmoil. Despite his strategic planning, Hatcher's downfall is precipitated by Sharpe's resilience and determination. After Sharpe uncovers the truth and rescues the Marchesa, Hatcher is confronted by Duco, who is displeased with Hatcher's failures, and executes him, making a grim end to his treacherous endeavours. Father Hatcher earns a C-tier placement due to his role as a manipulative yet ultimately subordinate antagonist. While his actions significantly impact the plot, he does lack the depth and personal menace of higher tier villains. His reliance on others to execute his plans, and his eventual demise at the hands of an ally underscores his limitations as a formidable adversary. Next is George Wickham, who is the secondary antagonist of Sharpe's Justice. He is played by Douglas Henshall. Captain Wickham, who is an officer of the Scarsdale Yeomanry under Sir Willoughby Parfitt, lost command to Major Sharpe as soon as he arrives in the area. Although outwardly loyal, Wickham was involved in Parfitt's scheme to sabotage rivals and blame local unrest on activist Matthew Truman. After beating Sharpe in a fencing match, Wickham deliberately mishandled crowd control during Truman's speech, inciting violence and falsely blaming Sharpe. Later, he ambushed Sharpe and Truman, fatally shooting him while Sharpe, Harper and Hagman escaped. Arrogant and predatory, he led an attack on a steam engine meant for Lord Stanwick, but was defeated by Sharpe, who disarmed and wounded him. When Wickham tried to pin the blame on Sharpe, Stanwick exposed the lie and allowed Sharpe to finish him, but Sharpe chose instead to take him prisoner for justice. Captain Wickham is a classic petty tyrant, an insecure, self-serving officer who thrives under corrupt leadership and wilts under real authority. As second-in-command to the corrupt Sir Willoughby Parfitt, Wickham traits reflect the worst aspects of military entitlement without competence or integrity. For me, that's why he goes into the B tier of villains. He was performed fantastically by Henshall, but as a character lacked the true authority of a higher-tiered villain. Next is Guardsman O'Rourke, who is a minor antagonist in Sharpe's battle. He was played by liamkrownos. O'Rourke was a soldier in the Irish Company, an inexperienced Irish unit trained by Major Sharpe. Though initially cooperative, supporting Sharpe in a raid for weapons and fighting off a French attack, he was later swayed by false anti-British propaganda spread by French agent Juanita. Tasked with escorting Lord Kiley's pregnant wife Lucy to safety, O'Rourke betrayed his command, murdered Lieutenant Jenkins, and delivered Lucy to the enemy, Brigadier General Loop. During the battle between Loop's and Sharpe's forces, O'Rourke and his fellow traitors appeared, misleading Rifleman Perkins into thinking reinforcements had arrived. O'Rourke, though, fatally bayoneted Perkins before being hunted down by Sergeant Harper, who avenged the betrayal by killing him with his bayonet after O'Rourke's weapon jammed. This certainly was a satisfying death, with Dara O'Malley showing incredible range in emotion. O'Rourke for me just earns a C tier placement. He was a character who essentially converted to the enemy and had no real ground threat to Sharpe. I think what stops him from going into D tier was the fact that he did kill a chosen man in Perkins, and his death was iconic and made me audibly cheer. Moving on now to Guy Chalon, a secondary antagonist on Sharpe's Revenge, played by Phil Smeaton. There's not really much to say about Chalon. He was one of Duco's loyal soldiers who helped him steal Napoleon's treasure, killing Colonel Malo to frame Sharpe. What we know about him is that he was a former altar boy with some Latin. Chalon spied on Sharpe's trial and reported key developments back to Duco. In Naples, he guarded the treasure with Duco, and helped in the defence against Sharpe and Calvet's forces. As I said, not much to say about this character. He is, unfortunately, just a D tier villain. Small scale, small-minded, and easily forgotten once he's no longer useful. He's a great example of how Sharpe is filled with antagonists at every level. Not just generals and spies, but little men who just thrive in the dark corners of society. Now we have Brigadier General Guy Lou of Sharpe's Battle, who is the main antagonist of the episode. He was betrayed by Oliver Cotton. Guy Lou was a brutal French brigadier who swore revenge on Sharpe after Sharpe executed 2 of his men for massacring a Spanish village. He used false propaganda, torture, and manipulation via his lover, Donna Juanita, to undermine Sharpe and the Irish troops he was training. Lou captured Lady Kylie to blackmail her husband and tried to rape her, but he was stopped by her defiance. In the final battle, after killing Lord Kylie, Lou was slain by Sharpe in a brutal sword fight. Interestingly, in the novel, Sharpe fought Lou in the stream outside of the city and ended up holding him underwater and drowning him. The television portrayal emphasises Lou's sadistic intelligence. He's not just a brute, he taunts Sharpe, manipulates situations to inflict maximum psychological damage, and exerts a terrifying charisma over his men. Lou's TV incarnation earns him a firm spot in the A tier. While he lacks the long-term game scheming of villains like Duco, Lou stands out as pure force of chaos and brutality. He's terrifyingly effective, unrelentingly cruel, and forces Sharpe into moral and strategic corners that few others do. His performance is chilling and memorable, and Sharpe's battle is elevated by his presence. He is a worthy adversary, and one who makes his mark with sheer savagery. And I must admit, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of Lou. I feel he would have been a legendary tier villain, if given more screen time. Now, perhaps one of, if not the most iconic adversary in the Sharpe TV series, Sir Henry Simmerson, who was portrayed by Michael Cochrane. Sir Henry Simmerson is one of the most enduring and insufferably pompous villains in the entire series. Unlike some of the more violent or cunning foes Sharpe faces, Simmerson stands out because of how institutionally powerful and dangerously incompetent he is. A man whose ego and ignorance cost lives and nearly end Sharpe's career more than once. In his first appearance in Sharpe's Eagle, Simmerson is introduced as a wealthy, politically connected colonel sent to the Peninsular War with his South Essex Regiment. From the start, it's clear he's completely unfit to command. He's arrogant, vain, class-obsessed, and utterly dismissive of experience or competence, especially when it comes from someone like Sharpe, a commoner raised through the ranks. And let's not forget that famous line Simmerson says to Sharpe, "You mean to say you're not a gentleman?" Simmerson embodies the worst elements of the British officer class at the time, obsessed with social status, driven by pride, and deeply resentful of merit-based advancement. He regularly humiliates his men, flogs them for petty infractions, and surrounds himself with equally shallow yes-men like Gibbons and Berry. His actions at the bridge at Valdecasca, where he orders a reckless charge and retreats in cowardice, leaving his own men to die, nearly destroys the regiment's honour. Sharpe's intervention not only saves the day, but also humiliates Simmerson, setting up a bitter rivalry that stretches across the series. Simmerson reappears in Sharpe's regiment, still clinging to power and prestige. Here, we see him at his most conniving, covering up a mass recruitment fraud and overseeing a sham regiment used to funnel conscripts into other units for profit. Despite being repeatedly proven wrong and cowardly, Simmerson always manages to weasel his way back into favour thanks to his aristocratic connections. A recurring frustration in Sharpe's world, where merit is often trumped by title. Michael Cochrane's portrayal is pitch perfect, sneering, self-righteous, and dripping with superiority. What makes Simmerson so loathsome isn't just his incompetence or cowardice, but his unshakable belief that he's better than everyone else. Simmerson does appear in the very last Sharpe appearance in Sharpe's peril, albeit this time he is saved by Sharpe when left for dead. Once he recovers from his wounds and the final battle ends, he leaves Sharpe with a handshake and shows him respect. A moment which displays even the most cruel men can be capable of changing their ways. Simmerson has to be in the legendary tier. He doesn't wield a sword or conspire in the shadows. Instead, his villainy lies in his abuse of rank, his disdain for competence, and his ability to survive despite repeated failure. He's a constant thorn in Sharpe's side, not because he's powerful, but because he's entrenched in a broken system that enables men like him to rise and stay in power. He's infuriating, but also completely believable, a symbol of everything Sharpe is fighting against. That enduring relevance and richly detestable performance earns Simmerson a solid place in the legendary tier. Now, Jane Gibbons, also known as Jane Sharpe, is a major character in the adaptation. She was portrayed by Abigail Cruttenden. She is one of the most complex and tragic figures in Sharpe's story, initially sympathetic, later manipulative, and ultimately abandoned by the very world she chased. At first glance, she seems courageous and independent, helping Sharpe expose corruption despite being Simmerson's niece and Gertrude's reluctant fiancée. Marrying Sharpe and joining him in Spain suggests loyalty and spirit, especially as she would work as a surgeon assistant in harsh conditions. But Jane's deeper desires, status, refinement, and comfort eventually override her love. Disillusioned by Sharpe's uncultured, soldierly nature, she's drawn to more genteel men like the plagiarist poet Shellington and the aristocratic Rossendale. Her betrayal isn't just romantic, it's financial, social and emotional, as she steals Sharpe's money and flees to live a more civilized life. Yet despite her ambition and calculation, Jane ends up isolated. The upper class never truly accept her, and after Lord Rossendale dies in the Battle of Waterloo, she's left behind, and alone. A tragic symbol of someone who traded loyalty for luxury and lost both. For me, she goes into the B tier, because she wounds Sharpe more deeply than many battlefield enemies ever could. She's not a general or a spy, but her betrayal is personal, and hard for Sharpe to handle at the time. What made it work, actually, was that Sean Bean and Abigail Cruttendon were married at the time, which gave the characters great chemistry. She was elegant, cold, and calculating. Now, General Jean-Baptiste Calvet, or Jean Calvet, or Maurice Calvet, depending on which adaptation you prefer, was played by Oliver Pierre in Sharpe's Mission and Siege, and John Benfield in Sharpe's Revenge. Technically a villain from the sense that he was on the opposite side of Sharpe in the war, however in my view, not a villain who went out of his way to harm Sharpe in the way Ducos and Lou would. He was a veteran of the Russian campaign. Calvet assisted Colonel Cresson in a failed plot to capture Wellington's spy master Ross, using deserters and powder magazines as bait. When Sharpe and Ross blew up the magazine instead, Calvet had Cresson executed for his failure. In Sharpe's Revenge, Calvet was defeated yet again by Sharpe in Toulouse. However, Napoleon's treasure got stolen, and believed that Sharpe had took it. He eventually accepted that Ducos was a real thief, and proposed a joint mission to Naples. Because the war was over, and Calvet's rank now was meaningless, Sharpe insisted on leading, and together they took Ducos' stronghold. With the death of Ducos in this episode, Calvet urged him to let his vengeance die with his death, and just to return to a peaceful life with Lucille. For me, Calvet goes to D tier, not due to weakness or irrelevance, but because he's just simply not a true villain. While technically on the opposing side of the war, he functions more as a helpful neutral party, or even reluctant ally. There's no malice or cruelty to his actions. In fact, he's a rare example of a French officer Sharpe doesn't despise. Calvet doesn't belong on a list of Great Sharpe's enemies because he's too decent to earn the title. Lieutenant John Berry, played by a young James Bond himself, Daniel Craig. He was a brooding, vicious junior officer of the South Essex Regiment, often seen lurking in the shadows of his more polished but equally loathsome companion, Gibbons. While Gibbons played the aristocratic dandy, Berry was the muscle, crude, violent, and openly disdainful of anyone beneath his rank. He enthusiastically supported Simmerson's sadistic love of discipline, once forcing Private Dodds to parade the day after a brutal flogging with a threat of more lashes if he didn't shape up. Berry just didn't follow orders, he enjoyed the cruelty. When he discovered Josephina was short of money, he saw an opportunity, playing cards with Gibbons and offering to cover the costs of her servants if he could make a move on her himself. He won, then gleefully produced a whip, declaring he was going to teach Josephina respect. It's a chilling moment of premeditated abuse, only thwarted by Sharpe's timely intervention, who then took Josephina into his protection. Berry's villainy escalated further. With Sharpe now promoted and in charge of the Light Company, Simmerson discreetly told Gibbons and Berry that it was time to eliminate the new captain. Berry hatched a plan to provoke Sharpe into a duel, a trap. Whether Sharpe won or lost, the excuse came when Berry and Gibbons attacked Josephina in a final act of depravity, beating her emotionally and physically. Sharpe issued the challenge, and Berry accepted, confident his connections or sword would protect him. Major Hogan, ever the strategist, intervened to protect Sharpe by assigning the two men to a scouting mission. But when they came under fire, Berry turned on Sharpe, shooting him in the leg and cornering him in a remote spot. His cruelty reached its peak. Not content to kill Sharpe outright, he vowed to make him beg first. Kicking the wounded captain while gloating, it would have been the end for Sharpe, if not for Sergeant Harper. With impeccable timing, Harper stabbed Berry through the back, ending his vicious career then and there. For me, that's why Berry ranks as an A-tier villain, not just for his violence and depravity, but because his evil is intimate and insidious. He doesn't command armies or pull strings in high places, he brings pain directly to the people around him, driven by class resentment, entitlement, and cruelty. His actions leave scars, physical, emotional, and narrative. And Daniel Craig made him unforgettable. That ends part 1 of this tier list. Join me next time when we go over the remaining Sharpe villains of the universe, from Duco to LaRue to Obadiah Hageswell. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to keep up to date with more content. And as always, I'll see you over the hills and far away.